Hello, welcome everybody. Hey, Jen.
Hi.
Happy Martin Luther King Day to everybody. Jen and I were just talking about it's MLK Day, and we love celebrating. We quote Martin Luther King all the time with "I have a dream." We have lots of dreams, dreams for our business, dreams for our profession, dreams for our family, and so it's just such a great day to stop and be present to that and think about what are we committed to, which I think follows up on our conversation from last week. We were talking about, what we were expecting from our partners and team and our code of conduct and, who should we be for each other. And I think that's something that, Mr. King, we would hear him in many of his speeches and writing, talk about who should we be for each other. And so I think that's just a great follow on from what we were exploring last week.
I muted myself because my dogs all of a sudden were barking and I realized I didn't kennel them. So I was texting furiously to say, dogs, streaming, help. So we'll see what happens. Yeah, I mean, this conversation of what are you committed to? What do you value? What are you committed to? And how far are you willing to go for those commitments? Or, what will you put at stake or something? Sticking with the Martin Luther King theme for a moment, obviously he paid the ultimate price, but before that, he certainly put his actions into, his words into actions, his money where his mouth was, and went out and really risked so much personal safety, reputation. I mean, we revere him and what he did, but at the time, a decent number of people probably really were disturbed and afraid of him. And, he represented change that maybe they didn't support. And, and so certainly we have an opportunity that started in 2020 with the social unrest to really step up and put more of his dream into a reality, especially those of us with privilege. And I know that I have said this before, streaming, and I'll say it again, that I am searching for the way that I can help, help people of color and indigenous people and Black people all, help them all have real, true inclusion and equity, and really feel that they have a full seat at the table and not be afraid and not live in fear, as so many do. And so, I guess if we're going to talk about ethics and values organizationally, I'll say that personally, that's one of my values, something I really want to put my words into action, even more in 2021. I spent a lot of time in 2020 learning and listening and asking people to teach me and trying to better understand. And I'm still going to continue to do that because I'm not anywhere close to really getting it, I think, but I'm trying really hard. But in 2021, I know at Convergence, one of our focal points is, what are we going to do about it?
Right.
What more can we do about it?
Right.
So anyway, just to say that, to acknowledge that that's what today is about. It's just to really honor the work of Martin Luther King, but to do it once a year on one day and then just go back to life as we know it is probably pretty gross. And we, we have to do more than that. That's for sure.
Well, and I think that learning is a great place to start. I think some people question, where do we start? And I think that's why we, all have, at Convergence have learned. We've learned together. We've learned individually. Our church is going through a process, and that we've been learning and doing some studying together. And so I think that's important to continue. And I think one of the things that I've gotten out of that is just like questioning, beliefs that I've had that I just either grew up with from family, or that I grew up with from TV, or that I grew up with, like, it was just socially okay to say and do things that are not anymore. And so that can be hard. It can be a little pokey and, but it's interesting how much of that's just ingrained in us. And that's why it's ingrained in our society and hard to stomp out. And we can't just do it in one day, to your point. No. So I just think that's important. And, we're part of the CPA Consultants Alliance. And I was just reviewing today, Jen, the agenda. And that's one of the things that, as consultants to the profession, that as a group we say is important for us to learn more about it together as a group, but then help our clients and CPA firms and those that serve the CPA firms how to be more inclusive. What should we be doing in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion? And so that's elevated to a top priority for us as a group as well. So,
well, what I find really interesting, Tamara, you and I have never had this discussion, so this could blow up on us here, but I find it interesting that, in the workplace, it is appropriate and necessary and politically correct, maybe, and even to your competitive advantage to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, to have programs, to have a committee, to have something on your website. To digitally search for you and see nothing about that would probably be a big missing for candidates.
Right.
But yet in our country, we make that political. Like if you and I are at church talking about it, or if we're at a dinner party, we don't go to any of those places in person anymore because of the pandemic. But if we were, like socializing, and I started talking about the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, some percentage of people, we'd get in like a Facebook fist fight or something about, I don't know, the riots, or, like politics would come into play, and your president versus my president. And that's a crying shame. And I just think it's like, there's a disconnect between what we might be trying to pretend at work versus what we're living away from work. And that I experience that disconnect with others. And I am trying to make sure I don't have a disconnect.
Right.
If I believe in it at work, I believe in it in my personal life. I believe in it in the voting booth and all that. And it's all integrated, and I'm not able to separate it. And I don't know how we make it authentic and true for our workplace if we don't really like invest in it, immerse, invest, and try to be transformed by it ourselves as people. And
right.
So anyway, I just wanted to tell you that I've been having that thought, and especially as I've talked to clients, what happened in the Capitol, I had some clients say, we're not going to say a word about that. We don't have a position on that. I forwarded to you that I think it was Accounting Today that covered the big four, CEOs and their statements about it. And I forwarded it to you and said, I'm so happy that they've made statements about it and taken a position. They took a position, and the position was it wasn't okay to breach our Capitol. I took that same position in social media and had people that I love and care about jump down my throat and, do the Facebook or Twitter fist fight with me because they thought that, I was wrong. And they thought it was perfectly fine to have that protest and turn into a riot and go into the Capitol without permission and hurt people and all that, or whatever. They thought that was, they justified it, I guess is what I'm going to say. And so I look at all of that. And for me, this is like, this is like a class with a case study, and it isn't a class, so don't anybody freak out. I can't teach you the answers to this case study, but the case study is, at what place do you have like personal ethics of owners and leaders, personal values and beliefs be disconnected from the entity's values and beliefs? And is that possible? But I don't think it is. If it is, and you somehow disconnect them, I think you run into this terrible authenticity problem. And then also an inability to really make what you're saying you value at work real. Right. Like it's, we'll use my dad saying it's putting lipstick on a pig. It's pretending. It's, we'll put a web page up and we'll say these things, but we're not really going to transform our way of thinking and being. And we're not really going to shift our belief system to support what we're saying. And that's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of that. Not just this is diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think there are lots of places that this disconnect is possible.
Yes, I agree. Well, and I also think that that's why that code of conduct that we talked about last week is so important, because I don't know how you have, if you and I did not have shared or aligned values, and we have differences in opinions, and we have some differences in opinions and some political views. And I think over the years, we've both come closer, on some of those, but we have a shared value and commitment to human beings and to life and how we treat people and how we include people. And if we didn't have that, I don't know. I just don't know how we would work. I mean, how do you be partners? How do you talk to our team about that? How do we demonstrate that? And so that's why that code of conduct, I think, is so important, for us to stop and define what are we committed to? What can you count on me for? And, life is becoming, so much more integrated. I don't have work here and then life over here. So I don't know how you would separate that. I'm going to be inclusive no matter where I am. So, and it's difficult.
Or maybe the bigger the business, the more you can hide it or something. I don't know though, because I think what ends up happening is that you just hire more people that are disconnected from
Right.
The value statements.
Right.
And then their behavior's disconnected, and people see that, and it gives permission to all kinds of stuff. So anyway, I don't want to be too Pollyanna or idealistic. I mean, there's a part of me that realizes that, you're going to have people of differing views in your organization. And, but I do think that this is an area to really contemplate as a leadership team, as an executive committee. What do we say we value? What do we say we're committed to? What positions are we taking and statements are we making? And then how are we making sure that our leaders are learning and shifting and transforming to authentically support them? And if they don't authentically support them, are we the wrong place for those people to be?
Right. Well, and you just made me think of the word culture. Yeah. How do we create a culture that we say, an intentional culture? We talk about an intentional culture. How do I create an intentional culture if we're not doing that? Otherwise I have mine over here, you have yours over there, and, other leaders have theirs, and we don't have a culture. We have Tamara's culture and Jen's culture. So it's hard to create that culture that, we can count on if we're not doing that. Yeah. So might be a little Pollyanna, but we have a dream. So
we do. And if we have a culture of an inclusion, if that's really what the commitment is, a culture of inclusion, then what does that look like exactly? Right. And how can we make sure that all of our programs consider who might not feel included here? And how can we make them feel included? And who's leading this program, or who manages this department, or who's working with this client, and how can we make sure that we're including not just our team members, but their team members? And, every program has to be filtered through the coffee filter of inclusion then, and it has to pass the inclusion test or something. And
so where do clients fit? You just made me think. So what if my clients don't embrace inclusion? Where do they fit in our client acceptance, and who our A clients are? And they don't.
Sorry. The hardliner in me comes out, but that's definitely, and I know that there were clients last summer when the riots were there and Black Lives Matter, and was really a serious, conversation, and firms were like, should I make a statement or should I not make a statement? And we were talking to them about it and trying to encourage them to take positions and make it clear where they stood. And some of them really were afraid, my clients will not accept this. They are going to, think that this is wrong or whatever. And I was like, wow, then have a conversation with those clients, share where you are, hear what they're saying too, see if they could come to understand your position, or why, how can you really say you're committed to this and then serve clients who are utterly uncommitted to it or something. And I'm not saying that you then say, okay, who'd you vote for? Well, you're not my client anymore. We don't have to go to that level of homogeneity or whatever, similarity. But we do need to recognize that if we have a client that quits us because of what we believe and what we're committed to, and we've displayed those beliefs and commitments, and they don't like them, and so they'll fire us, then we weren't supposed to be with that client.
Right.
I mean, we just weren't. They're not part of the culture, and our people would not feel good about working on them. And you can't have clients where you're like, well, this client, we really can't send women. They don't listen to them. Or, this client, I don't, they're really traditionalists. So, we can't use the technology with them, or whatever it is that we're committed to. At some point you start to say, does it make sense for us to make all these exceptions to the things we tell our team are our commitments and our culture and our values and where we're, our ethics and where we're headed? But, we're headed and we're doing all these things except over here with this client. And by the way, over there also. And, at what point do you start to say, wait a minute, that's another disconnect?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it just erodes the trust in the leadership team and what they say. I'm going to say one thing and do another instead of, do as I say and as I do. And it's hard to, say we're inclusional, without all these places. But I also think that's the other reason you talked about separating politics. It's not about politics. It's about, here is what we say we're committed to. Let's go back to the code of conduct. Let's go back to our ethics and who we say we're going to be for people. And we're going to be inclusive. We're going to create opportunities for everybody. We're going to have diversity of thought and opinion. And that's part of the diversity as well. And so that's not about politics. So I think that's important to consider too.
I think in this country right now, Tamara, in people's personal lives, everything feels like it's about politics. And that's why it gets like anger making or something, instead of like diversity of thought and different perspectives and having the debate. But I will tell you, and I hate sounding righteous. I do. I hate because I know I'm not right. It's my opinion. There are many others and I might be dead wrong, but on this one, I feel pretty solid. If people are not committed, if someone is not committed that people of color, that BIPOC individuals should be treated fairly and included and have an equal voice and position on the stage or whatever you want to call it, I can't relate.
Right.
And so I would have a hard time serving them, and I would have a hard time being partner with them or leading a group together with them or something. And that sounds awful because that's not being inclusive. I'm not being inclusive. And I took Harvard had a really great study that they are doing. It's still an active study that you can take. It's an online assessment to assess your implicit bias or kind of like secret bias. And the questions they ask are really eye-opening, and we're happy to share the link for it. And if Emily's listening and she knows where that link is, maybe she'll pop it into the comments. But I took that assessment, and one of the questions it asked me is, do I believe that any group should be oppressed? And I, wanted to just jump on it and answer, no, nobody should be oppressed. But then I thought, gosh, I don't want the Ku Klux Klan marching in my streets. If I was the king, that would be banned, and I have some groups I would oppress.
Yeah.
And that makes me as guilty as anybody else of being prejudiced, if you will. But so anyway, this is a tough conversation we're having right now. One, I don't relish, and I'm sorry, listeners, this is not full of laughter and fun today, but this is a really important exploration for you and your organization. And as we think about our next generation culture, I'm forgetting the statistic, but it is significant. Like 1 in 3 Generation Y and X U.S. citizens is a person of color or mixed race. And I think 1 in 3 is the number, but if it's not 1 in 3, it's more than 1 in 3.
Yeah,
so
I think it's 1 in 3. I think you're remembering correctly. Yeah.
Yeah. And so think about that for a minute. I mean, this idea of white dominance or something, it's just like demographically invalid. Certainly a long time ago, in the last decade, the number of non-white births in the US outstripped white births. I mean, there's a moment when whites will be minority. I don't get why people don't understand that and why we would have any conversation about supremacy. But I also don't want to negate how our systems work today. And anyway, I just think it's very interesting as we think about this in the workplace and how we bring it to life, because next generation clients and talent are going to expect it of us, and not just as a web page.
No, they're going to want us to be demonstrating it and see us living it every day.
Yeah.
And in our processes, and in our recruiting, and in our employee promotions, and in our compensation. We could talk about, the diversity of compensation between male and females that still exists today. I mean, so it's, all different, aspects of that. And we have to just continue to chip away at it. That's what, Martin Luther King would say. He's like, all right, what's next? What are we tackling next? Where can we stomp that out here? How can we make changes? And so that's what we have to look at. And so it's so important. And I think diversity, equity, inclusion, we've talked about before, kind of gets relegated to an HR function or initiative. But we think it should be a leadership initiative, but HR could lead it. You could take the lead if they see it as an HR initiative. You could take the lead and say, what are we committed to here? What are we going to do? What are we going to produce? How are we going to chip away at it? What are we going to do to be more inclusive? Where are we not? And really start to tackle those areas. What processes, what, evaluations, what are we going to do? And pick a couple things this year that you're going to go to work on. And I hope part of it's education. So maybe it's education and then 2 other things, but how are we going to measure it? What is it going to look like? So,
yeah,
very important. Anything else? I know we're at time. I don't think we expected we go that long on that topic, but we're after.
How could we not? How could we not? Right? I mean, I just think take a bias class, read a few books. We have tons of resources at Convergence, tons, and they're not resources that that we came by ourselves. They're resources people gave us, our friends, our Black friends, our Latino friends, our Asian friends. Our people who feel that they aren't included gave us and said, read these, share these, learn from these. And we have pages and pages of wonderful blogs, podcasts, books, movies, all kinds of things that could open your eyes. And the more we learn, I promise, the more it'll change your worldview. We all know that. So I guess that's what I would say. And I'm still trying to make time to focus and learn also, and to be proactive. I'm going to keep learning. I can never know enough about this subject, just because of where how I was raised.
Well, and it's going to continue to evolve. And Brandon says out there that education will change the culture. And I don't know if that's a book, Brandon, or if you're just making a statement.
Yes,
I agree with it regardless. So I think that's fantastic. It is education. It is learning. One of the books that we read with my church group was A Good Time for Truth. And it's stories, individual stories of people here in Minnesota that they wrote their perspectives. And so it was all different, backgrounds, and, some Latino and some Black, and they each wrote a short story about their experience here in Minnesota. It was eye-opening, heart-wrenching also. But, and I grew up in these places. I knew the University of Minnesota. I knew these areas. And just that learning and that listening by reading was huge. So, that's the stories. And that's, I know you've been asking a lot of, people to say, tell me your story. And that's one of the biggest ways that we can learn. But that, there's books out there like that. There's movies, like you said, listen to the stories. So,
well, and Brandon's, making the comment, our walk has got to be bigger than our talk. Actions speak louder than words. So, undertaking the education and doing something about it. Yeah. And shifting ourselves first.
Right.
I know that much. I've been working on myself more than I've been trying to look at my team or my clients, just working on myself. and that will help me shift everything else around me. So love it.
All right. Well, happy Martin Luther King Day. Thank you for being with us today. Have a great week. We look forward to seeing you next week, and take care. Be well, everybody.
Bye now.